All right, it's testing. Awesome. So let's start off with, let's try the clicker. Hello. Hi there. So we're going to start out with who am I? Why am I here? Why am I talking about what I am talking about, which we'll get into soon. So my name is Hehr. I am a front-end developer at a HR software platform called Namely. I am a massive Disney fan, mostly of the parks and animated movies. So topic of discussion later on if you'd like. I am a bouldering enthusiast, got into it a lot more lately in New York. And I'm a human, I'm a person, and I build products. And you can find me as Hipster Brown. If you recognize the logo around, that's me. And as Zara said, I have a pretty killer mustache. You may have noticed it by now, but it's not to be touched. It's very important, but only $5 for a picture, so it's a bargain for today. So why I'm up here, and why do I care about what I'm talking about? So my background as a front-end developer, I actually have a degree in psychology and leadership, mostly focusing on how people work together and what they're thinking while they're doing all of this. And as a front-end developer at Namely, I'm constantly collaborating with designers to make sure that their ideas and their mock-ups and everything come to life in the correct way, and working with back-end developers to make sure that the way their data is structured and how the API works and everything comes to the front end successfully and efficiently and is put back in the right place. And most of all, I just love the community. It's one of the reasons I got started with web development and web design in the first place, because I went to these meetups and I went to these conferences and really just fell in love with the ability to connect with everybody through this one resource, the web, and design and development. And I also love this community, so 6 seasons in a movie. But who else should care? Who does this pertain to? What does this apply to? What is this message? Everybody. It's seriously. But for this to work, for the other side of empathy, for empathy alone to work, we should all care about taking care of the community and taking care of what matters. And so you may have heard the word empathy before, but what does it mean? What is it really talking about? What am I kind of trying to describe? You may have heard it before. The most succinct definition I've found is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. And that's really powerful, and it's been talked about a lot in the design community as a way to connect with users and to design around what they're feeling and create the best user experience. It's also known as putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Take a walk, take a mile in someone else's steps, seeing the world through the eyes of someone else. And this shouldn't only apply to our users, but also the people we work with, the designers, the developers, the managers, to really understand what they're thinking as we work together to create a better product and a better experience. And so that's kind of where the other side of empathy comes from. And where it started as from using Twitter. I am a big fan of Twitter. I love the open community that is part of it and be able to connect with people globally, but that openness sometimes has some backlashes. With that 140 character limit, we sometimes have snap judgments. People like to just fire off tweets whenever they see something because it's so easy. And then the mob mentality comes around, and there's just this whole stream of negativity that seems to come in every once in a while. That really bums me out, and it really bummed me out about a year ago, last March. It was actually about a year ago that I really started thinking about this further and spoke about it at a meetup called Design Orlando, where I'm originally from. And I spoke about this, created a discussion around it, and then eventually created a short essay and put it up on the Pastry Box project. Has anyone heard of this? Raise your hand, yes. All right, so the Pastry Box project is a great little open platform, and I spoke about it and wrote it, and since then, since last June when it was published, it's been shared over 850 times, which just shocked me. I looked it up yesterday, just on Twitter alone. I don't know where else, they don't use stats, but I'm just glad this message is getting out there and people are trying to think more about how empathy impacts others. And so the other side of empathy is kind of a method of not only understanding others, but creating an open environment where others are encouraged to understand you as well. And so the breakdown of this is context, constructive feedback, communication, and caring. I love alliteration, it just kind of pushes the message forward. And so in each of these, I'm going to describe what the individual words mean, how it relates with the other side of empathy and that message I'm trying to show, and how I'm using it namely, and how we can apply it elsewhere in our everyday life. And so starting off with context. I gave you a little context about me, my background, why I care. And that's really kind of what context is. It's described as this, the interrelated conditions in which something exists. I found something a little bit better to understand as the internal and external factors that influence the decisions we make and the actions we take. And so this goes into how I think of no one being fully unopinionated. We hear about unopinionated developers and these frameworks and things like that, but I think there is still an opinion behind them because we all have our biases that come from somewhere, from our backgrounds, from how we were raised, from just general interactions with other people. We have these biases, and when we tend to hear conflicting biases, we tend to shut down and go into defense mode to show our own best practices. And to kind of push past that, we have to remember to just listen. It's the key element to really understanding someone and to really gather what they're trying to tell us. And constantly asking why. Why did you choose client-side rendering over server-side rendering? Why did you choose to use this issue workflow over another? Because they made that conscious decision for a reason, so we should learn why before we start jumping on top of them and shoving our own beliefs down their throat. And continuing to ask why means that we can understand more about them and fill the gaps of our understanding about other people. And we can even set the example. We don't even have to keep asking why, but giving context to others when we're submitting a pull request or doing things like this, and talking to others and about our decisions really helps set the example. And I'll go into more about that and how we set the example at Namely. So we have user stories for behind feature requests and workflows and things like that that we're all involved in, designers, developers, managers. And we use this syntax called Gherkin. And Gherkin captures the who, what, and why of a requirement in a simple and concise way. So as we're describing our user stories, which tend to come from our own biases, I like to listen and pay attention to what people are saying about their own user stories because I can learn a lot about where they're coming from, and what they're describing is usually themselves. And we can apply this elsewhere by remembering context when we're interacting with each other. Especially today, we have a lot of different opinions and views in the room, and we're going to be interacting with each other later. As we start speaking to each other and we hear a conflicting opinion or another bias, we should remember to take a deep breath, clear your mind of any of your immediate judgments. Ask why, sincerely. Why did they make that decision? Why do they think this way? And listen. Take it all in and try to understand. And eventually that can lead to maybe giving some constructive feedback. And constructive feedback is super important because it's that return of information that's a result of a process that helps us develop and improve process or product. This constructive feedback is super important. And there's a difference between criticism and constructive feedback in the language we use and how it's taken by another person. And so when we're younger, our first bit of constructive feedback was, if you don't have anything nice to say, then don't say anything at all. But from somewhere between like primary school to when we started joining social media, we tend to forget that message and forget where that came from and why we should be doing this. And I'd like to take it and change it a little bit. If you don't have anything constructive to say, then don't say anything at all. It's nice to get positive comments back from people when we push our work out into the world, but if we're honestly looking for constructive feedback, just saying, that's great, or super slick, isn't going to help us find out what we need to improve or what our users actually are noticing from what we're trying to improve upon. And some people say, but what about negative feedback? Because it's still getting some kind of feedback and you're still learning what they don't like. But most often, negative feedback isn't great because it's usually short, they're not very descriptive, and it just is not usually in a good format either. Like Twitter, it's where we get this type of snap judgments. And I found that good feedback, good constructive feedback, takes more than 140 characters. And I mean, other people agree, it's just they don't feel like they really cared that much to push forward, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And so for creating good constructive feedback, it should be a mutually agreed upon situation, an environment. There shouldn't be some kind of quick fire off into HipChat or Slack that says something that they should fix right away without expecting it. So there should be have those expectations set up in the beginning when you're creating this environment. An open space doesn't have to be a physical one, but it can be just a way for someone to feel like they can come away from this as if they need to and not feel trapped where they are. And always remembering context when you're giving constructive feedback to show why do I feel this bias or why did I make this decision and why do I think it's better. And so at Namely, we have code reviews for big pull requests and big feature requests and things like this. And with code reviews, it's intended to fix and find mistakes, hoping to improve the quality of the product and developer skills. And this is important for giving constructive feedback because it's a platform for setting up expectations. During a project, during a feature branch, and during a pull request, we can create this environment that's open, sets that up an expectation for the developer to listen, and for us to give constructive feedback to them, and for everyone to just really understand what's going on. And we can encourage constructive feedback in our open source projects even. I don't know how many know this, but if you put a contributing.md file or just a contributing text file within a GitHub project, it automatically gives any person creating a new issue or a new pull request this message, where they can go see the guidelines for contributing to that project. One of my favorite is for the Atom editor by GitHub, because it's very extensive into how to submit an issue, how to submit a pull request, what are their syntax guidelines, their style guide. That way, when creating these pull requests, all those shallow things that happen usually in the beginning of a conversation can go away because they're already setting the expectation to know how it works. And that's just one method of communicating with our users and our fellow open source developers, designers, what have you. And so communication is at the source a successful conveying of sharing or ideas and feelings between people. And it's not just firing off a tweet. It's into the ether. It's communicating between people so we can know what's going on. And this is kind of the medium through which we use the first two kind of tenets of the other side of empathy and giving constructive feedback and taking and gaining context. And so communication is what we say, how we say it, and where we say it. And it's just that broad area that encompasses how we interact with each other. For example, the language we use when we are using empathy or are applying empathy, I statements. They're great for constructive feedback because you're saying that I have found a better plugin than that, or I have learned because this experience. But for getting context, saying, oh, I know this is not as useful as saying, so what were you feeling, or where did you learn this type of development process? Where did you learn how to develop or anything? But for getting context, use statements are great, like I just said, asking what you are thinking or what you are feeling. But it's bad for giving constructive feedback, because saying you picked the wrong plugin is not going to help them because they're going into defense mode defending that decision rather than saying, I have found this plugin that may work better because of this, this, and this. And so the communication platforms we use at Namely are really important for the medium. In general, we use HipChat just for quick fire-off conversations, letting each other know what's going on around the office, the company. We have stand-ups just to have general meetings and sit or see each other face to face and really have that human interaction of what's going on. Recorded discussions that need to be referenced later. We have GitHub issues and Trello cards. That way, not only do we know where this information is held when we're developing, but later on when we're reviewing these cycles, we know what's going on in the company. And for general event notices and stuff, we have email. Email's not quick enough for general conversation, but it's nice for a casual information gathering. And you can create information and create communication channels that are easier for people to use. Twitter is not, it's very open, but it's not great for receiving good communication between, among users. Because most often we all hear how much it sucks. And this is one of my least favorite words in the human language because it has no descriptive qualities, it is completely negative and doesn't push anything forward. Unless you are talking to me about DJ Roomba, I do not care if anything sucks. I want to hear more about what you're feeling and why you feel this way to push it forward. And we have these channels that are so readily available. We have Slack, Gitter, which is kind of the Slack alternative for direct GitHub and connected to GitHub projects. IRC has been an open format around for a long time. And GitHub is even really nice because a lot of people, we have those issue forums and we have those pull requests, comments, and things like that that help us understand and apply empathy. And most of all, the motivation to do all this is just caring. I told you why I care and why everybody else should care as well. And this is what I'm going through. And caring is just the feeling of concern or interest, to attach importance to something or look after and provide the needs of. By caring, we provide the needs of a product, of our project, or a community, and why we should care. And caring is sharing. It's also listening. And it's also understanding each other. And when we show that we care, we can push past the people who say, literally, no one cares about something. And to show we care, we can do a few different things. Rather than just firing off a snap judgment tweet or joining in the mob, do you care enough to write a blog post about this, about what you're interacting with, to help others to reference later? Do you care enough to file an issue on GitHub or any other type of issue tracker? Do you care enough to send an email to the developer or the team, to record a screencast, which goes really in depth in how you're interacting with this type of stuff and give that product owner the ability to dive deep and figure out your problem? Do you care enough to fix the problem yourself and submit a pull request? It's not always the easiest thing for people, but if you have the knowledge, you have the capability and the time, do you care enough to do that? And most of all, I like to follow this. Don't give in to hate. It leads to the dark side. Instead of firing off negativity, we can encourage positivity and care about our community because that's such a strong motivation. And at Namely, we have things like internal documentation. It's not the most fun thing to do. It's not as fun as creating a new design or interaction or feature, but it's super important for everybody, and it takes a little bit of caring to put aside your code for a second and focus on words and focus on wikis, code comments, style guides, and these type of things are not only good for new developers and onboarding, but old developers trying to reference old code. We have, at big companies, large quantities of old legacy code, and when we go back, we're like, what were they thinking? And sometimes the developer who wrote it, it's not there. So how do we know what's going on in their head and seek what their understanding is? And we can also exemplify caring in a different way. We can do it through mentoring or seeking out a mentor ourselves to learn from. And we can remember when we started out, if we really needed someone to help us find the right path. And remembering if we had a mentor, if we wanted one, and if we want to learn from somebody or even learning from our own mentees by trying to deep dive into a subject in order to teach it. And to clarify what empathy is not a pat on the back when someone's feeling down or sad. It's not saying cheer up because you know that they're feeling sad. But you don't understand it because you're having empty conversations. You are listening long enough to we're listening long enough to put ourselves into the conversation rather than just comprehending that. And it's definitely not sympathy. We're not feeling pity. We are feeling and working to understand each other. It's opening, listening, and constantly listening. And we can contribute towards this path to empathy around the community. In your company, you can just listen for a day. Start off by just listening to everybody, and trying to put yourself and ourselves in conversations. We can apply some of the examples I went over. Start off small, definitely, so it's not overwhelming for everybody as you're trying to apply this. We can also recruit others to keep ourselves in line. I know I mess up every once in a while because we're all human and we make mistakes, but I try to let others know what to watch out for on my side. And I try to remain open to sharing and listening to others. And sometimes people say, well, that sounds hard. It's a lot of thinking. It's a lot of things to remember and try to be aware of when we're interacting with each other. And I just say, deal with it. It's super important to push forward, and because the things that are worth it are hard. And if you want to learn more about empathy and exploring it in a practical way, I created a quick page on my website, hipsterbrown.com/empathy, of tons of resources from blog posts to books to videos that will help you explore and study further into empathy. And you can help keep me in line at hipsterbrown on Twitter, or by sending me an email at headhipster@hipsterbrown.com, because me at hipsterbrown.com didn't seem fun enough. And I truly, honestly want your feedback on what I spoke about today and your thoughts about inside your company. So if you see me, if we're talking later on and you want to give me feedback, I'm openly and welcome to it. So thank you.